again, generations are a very 20th century product. Yeah, because they're defined by technological change. I mean, the boomers were defined basically by the birth control pill, and then Gen Y, which would be yours, right? Are you a late millennial? I think maybe.
I might be, yeah.
So Gen Y, the Gen Xers rather, they are defined by dealing with the recalibration of social expectations in the aftermath of the pill. So this is why you get lads mags. This is why they all met at the pub, etc. Gen Y, the millennials, are defined by the internet, but it was a much more curated experience. As I always joke, no Zoomer finds Nyan Cat funny. So that is the big divide between millennials and Zoomers. The Zoomers are the ones that are dealing with the internet, a less curated experience, a more self-selective cultural experience. And this is why I think they're splitting off into what I call the children of the algorithm, the ones whose politics are fed to them by TikTok and Twitter and the like. They buy into the omni cause. This is why Greta Thunberg can march for climate change on one day and Palestine on the next. It doesn't have to make sense. It's just been presented to her. Versus the reactionary types who proactively seek out hidden texts and religious communities and reclaim that lost sprig of civilization to replant when the soil is a bit more fertile.
I don't want us to get more religious, but then I don't believe in the religious texts. So I suppose if you were me, you'd think, oh, the same, I imagine, if you didn't believe in any of it, right? If you thought, well, I don't think God wrote that stuff.
But do you not know Christians who are frankly better people than the sort of liberal hedonists whose only defining characteristic is how much pleasure they can have?
I think I just read Man's Search for Meaning.
Viktor Frankl, yes.
Yeah. And he is so thoughtful, and he speaks about, because the question he's always asked, and it's right at the end of his narrative about the Holocaust and his time in a concentration camp. And he says, the thing people always ask me is, what led these people to do this? And were they all horrible people? And obviously you're not just going to get a bunch of horrible people, just horrible for no reason or whatever. And of course there were all sorts of cultural and influences. But he says there are decent people and indecent people. That's how he sees it. And there were some concentration camp guards who were very good people who wanted to help as much as they could under the circumstances. And there were also fellow prisoners who were called capos who were in charge. A lot of them were horrible as well. And I'm a firm believer of that. There are plenty of Christians who are wonderful, wonderful people, plenty of atheists who are. If you are a Christian, I'm sure it's more likely you'll see online a lot of horrible atheists who, for example, I'm quite pro-choice with the whole abortion thing. And I went and did a documentary in Argentina about that. And I was following a woman who's a pro-lifer called Mariana Rodriguez, who's known as the crazy baby lady by the sort of left. She's pro-lifer and she's quite aggressive and she's got these plastic fetuses and stuff like that. And I got to know and really like her, even though we had these different opinions, which was great. I really liked that. And she was like, every few minutes she'd get a beep on her phone and it was another text or something. People who got hold of her number and they were sending pictures of their aborted fetuses to her. And it was disgusting. And all I thought then was, it doesn't change me being pro-choice or judging other pro-choices, but that there are firmly indecent people among my tribe. And it's really important that we always notice that. I mean, you must recognize there are some very indecent Christians as well.
Yeah, I think they're masquerading and are unfaithful to the moral substrate of the teaching. So okay, here's what convinced me. Because I was brought to church when I was a kid. So in 2008, my uncle took his own life, and it was very hard on the family.
Sorry to hear that.
That's all right. It was. I always wonder what he would have made of my career now. He got me hooked on comic books, so I blame him for my bankrupt bank account. But my family turned to going to church to deal with that, I think in a healthier way than would have been otherwise. My grandparents helped out with homeless charities in their borough. My mum started taking me to a local parish, and I was an impatient kid and I wanted to get home and play Xbox, so I didn't appreciate it at the time. And then I had a tumultuous adolescence and a series of unsuccessful relationships and the like, and I feel like I needed to piece back together a worldview that would explain why I kept making so many social mistakes. And in the course of that, I'd encountered Jordan Peterson's biblical lectures, so it was a very intellectual interest at first. And then I read C.S. Lewis's Abolition of Man, which is not one of his apologetics texts. It's actually a much more perennial text. There are 3 essays in there. The first, he's talking about a school textbook which gaslights the reader into thinking that anything they recognize about the outside world is just them projecting their feelings onto it. But he says, no, there are phenomena which can reliably elicit a human experience. So if you look at a waterfall, and many people think that's beautiful, that's because there's something imbued with the waterfall that speaks to something about the human experience. And so where does that come from? Okay, well, there must be this moral undercurrent that flows like a river. And he called it the Tao, appropriating ancient Chinese word for it. But he means the sort of moral music played throughout the universe. And all of the different traditions that are offshoots of that in different countries are parochial expressions of that. They're like little estuaries, but they're incomplete. So, okay, what is the closest thing to human beings knowing this moral undercurrent? Well, it's the principles that seem to work in all times and all places, but without homogenizing and destroying a native culture. Well, you're going to be hard-pressed to find that anywhere else than the Ten Commandments, and particularly the extra commandment that Christ gives, the golden rule, do unto others as they would have do unto you, the ultimate rule of moral reciprocity. And practically no other religion or tradition articulates it in that way, plus the philosophy of human dignity with Imago Dei. And so, then build on this with mere Christianity, he uses this thought experiment. And so he says, okay, well, let's say that's entirely true. Everyone can sign up to that. Atheists can sign up to that. The problem you then have is, how did they come up with that? Is it that Christ was a madman who just happened to get it right? Is it that he was an incredible liar? Or is the daunting realization that in some capacity he is who he claims to be? Now look, I still find it incredibly difficult to buy into a lot of the metaphysical claims, because unlike a lot of my American friends, I don't feel a personal relationship with Christ. I don't diminish the fact that they clearly feel it, but I'm just not there. I'm still quite a rationalistic person. But I do submit that most of my doubts about the inerrancy of the scripture are actually probably wrong compared to the correctness of its moral teaching that has predated me and seems to work in all times and all places.
I think there are leaps. So if we go back to what you were saying about the waterfall, it's inherently beautiful. I don't mean to argue. Was it C.S. Lewis?
Yes.
I don't want to argue with a great man, but a far more intelligent man than me. But of course, there's a biological argument for that. If you see a waterfall, if you see a sea, the river, things like that, they tend to be these beautiful things that help us to survive, right? So there's a biological imperative. You see a river, you find it beautiful, you want to go towards it. Well, it so happens that's a fertile land and it's going to help you to survive. So over hundreds of thousands of years, people who were drawn to those rivers would have survived and passed on their genes.
Sure, but there's not purely biological reasons that can explain away morality. I mean, people have tried to, but not all facets of morality are evolved.
Is it not a case of societal cohesion, which tribes worked together, the ones who valued certain, you can call them scriptures or just rules for life. The ones that were all about murdering one another didn't get very far.
Sure, but then we play chicken or egg. It's like, were they codified after they had been shown to be successful, or were they successful because they had been codified and provided to a given tribe?
Well,
and so...
that wouldn't work with evolution, because evolution would be most of the tribes didn't get those codified, just one or two by coincidence. If every tribe has slightly different morals, one or two might have had those ones and they survived better.
Yes, no. Okay, so I understand what you're saying, but what I'm saying is, did the tribe behave like that, then codify them as scripture, and then start disseminating them out elsewhere? Or was it presented to the tribe as the way to live, and then they practiced it therefore
by Christ,
or by Moses, or the Ten Commandments, and like that's the contention.
Yeah.
And there could well be evolutionary reasons, and I don't dismiss those, but I still can't get my head around how correct those are well before we could identify all of these complex phenomena. And also, I think it's fantastic for us to sit there and discuss the evolutionary reasons about this. But I think this comes back to your approach about natalism or staying at home. And it's a very liberal approach. It's a very sort of John Stuart Mill approach, where the bonds of social expectation and religion and familial obligation can rest on the consciences of a minority of exceptional individuals, and they see that as limiting or oppressive. And it might well be that without those things, they can go on to do great things that we can all benefit from. But the vast majority of people are not those exceptional individuals. The vast majority of people rely on a cultural safety net, and the vast majority of people still have the capacity to be good and wholesome people and great neighbours if they have a cultural expectation to live within. And so to start snipping at that cultural expectation when it appears to have worked in the places that it's implemented will lead to death from despair, and atomization, the ability to have kids. And it does seem to me that when people are nihilistic and they fall back on the tradition of Christianity, their lives flourish much more than the present consumerism or various other ideologies and religions.
It's complicated. I mean, I look at Scientology, which is very different, of course, but I know it does have a lot of good things in it. Otherwise, nobody would join. It has a lot of things in it that are pull your socks up, basically. A lot of the Jordan Peterson stuff is basically, that's what they tell you in Scientology when you join. Obviously, the backstory is nuts. Evil Lord Xenu from a different galaxy, to put thetans, body thetans in your body, all that stuff is bonkers. But the teachings helped a lot of people. It's why they join. Now, unfortunately, Scientology, unlike Christianity, is a cult. And once you're in, you're paying more and more money. But what I'm trying to say is, I think there are a lot of these belief systems that do a lot of good for a lot of people, but, and I don't think you disagree with this, they sometimes might restrict some people's individual liberty, which to me is important. But I understand what you're saying. There's a bigger thing going on.